Namaste and welcome to Amazing Vedas with Radhe, or her name was Susan Pfau. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor and pleasure. And a couple of words of introduction for our viewers. Radhe runs an amazing center for integral yoga and spiritual growth. It's called the La Grace Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Center. It's in beautiful place in Greenville, North Carolina. She's its executive director. I myself have been to this place more than once, and it's really an oasis of, should I say, an alternate vision of the future for all of humanity. So congratulations, Radhe, for creating this beautiful place where all seekers of wisdom and higher consciousness can come. And they have wonderful online programs which I recommend. You can join them. We'll post links to LaGrasse in this podcast itself, and we learn more about it as we carry on. And I also want to say that Radhe comes to this role after a very successful tenure in another field altogether, in the world of finance, where she was managing literally billions of dollars in investment firms, including Fidelity Investments, Gartmore Investments. She has an MBA from Harvard Business School. Can you imagine that? And
I
degrees.
don't tell people that. So I keep that.
Sorry. That's another life. That's
Don't
another life.
look
I
at me if
agree.
I
So
tell them
so
that.
so so we leave that for the moment, but you're trained in Ayurveda, you're trained in integral yoga, and in something that I know very little about, which is Vedic astrology, which is what we're going to talk about a little more. So I wanted to start by asking you about your own journey, from maybe your, should I say, childhood perhaps? What were your influences? Were you always aware of a higher calling? Or were there some really important events that happened? You can share whatever you like so that we get a better sense of where you're coming from.
Sure. And thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm very, very honored to be here. And I just want to mention before we even start that this LaGrasse Center here is not so much my vision, although I support the vision, but it's the vision of the Rama family, H.P. Rama and his family, and ultimately the support of the grace from the mother. So I'm simply kind of an instrument here on the ground with the sleeves rolled up, doing what I can to support that vision. But thank you for that introduction. In terms of my background, I'm rarely asked to speak about my early background, so this is one of the first. I was actually raised in an atheist family, so there was no mention or belief in a higher power or in God. But as I got kind of into my early teens, there was something. I had friends that were going to church, friends that were talking about Jesus and God. And out of a family of 5 siblings, I was the only one that kind of started to wonder, what is this all about? And so I had a couple of friends that were equally curious, and also from families that weren't necessarily spiritual or religious. And we just started picking churches to go to every couple of Sundays to kind of see and experience what this was about. And so
So was this in California or elsewhere?
I
Because
was
I
raised in
think
California until I was about, and I went to undergraduate in California. So I was out in California until I was about 24, 25, and then went back to Boston. Um, so it was an early seeking, I would say, but with no real answers. And, my family comes from a background of entrepreneurship. So my dad and his father had started multiple companies. And so my focus as I got out of high school, went to college for a year or two, and then kind of dropped out and got very involved in the family business, very interested in the kind of corporate environment, which is kind of the background for why Harvard. Um, but then went back to undergraduate school, finished finance and strategy from USC undergraduate, started working for a big 8 firm, Touche Ross in LA. And really, it wasn't until got married. My husband got accepted into Harvard Business School, a place that I always wanted to go. And so, as we made our way back to Boston in his second year, I applied. And what happened in my second year was really one of those kind of first real transitional points. We were in our kind of mid 20s, very poor, we hadn't saved much, and a lot of stress because we were piling up, almost 100,000 in debt with us both going back, but still very, comfortable and confident that that was the right path. But the stress was building up. And I found one weekend, I don't know if you're familiar, you must be familiar with Boston and Harvard. It sits on one side of the river. You can cross the bridge into Cambridge. And right across on the other side, there was a little bookstore called Seven Stars. It was actually in the basement. But as you see the window front, there's the crystals and the skull heads and all new age stuff, right? But something drew me there. And it was probably the fourth or fifth time that I went in. It was very small. And I had gone back into really the back corner where there was a little chair. And as I glanced up on the bookshelf, there was a book called Secret of the Veda.
Oh my.
This is interesting. Sri Aurobindo. Don't know who that is. I mean, obviously in Boston, there were many, many paths and initiation and paths, but not Sri Aurobindo and the mother, not integral yoga, not at the time that I was there. So I pulled it down. I sat in that little chair and I started to read. And of course, it made no sense to me, but I treasured it and I bought it and I took it home. And from there, wherever I could, this was obviously before the internet. In fact, my first year of Harvard was the first kind of portable computer that we had to buy. That was probably 50 pounds, but no real internet. So it took a while for me to find other books of his. But I started as I found them, I had no friends that knew Sri Aurobindo, but as I found them in different bookstores, I started to collect them. And there was something, don't even know how to say it, but there was something that brought this calm and this peace to me as I even just held the books. And I knew there was some truth and there was some reason that these books were calling me and Sri Aurobindo was calling me. Didn't even know who the mother was at that point, right? There was, again, nowhere that you can get books, no Sri Aurobindo centers, not a single friend until really 20 or 25 years later, I met Vladimir Yatsenko, who also works here at La Graz. I have a fellow traveler that I can discuss Sri Aurobindo with. But that was kind of the first trigger. But I continued the next 10 years to experiment on different paths and started to travel to India a little bit. But it came to a point where, I'm not sure why, but I decided I was going to buy the 10 mandalas of the Rig Veda. Secret of the Veda, my first book, even though I had others. What is this Rig Veda? So I bought these. Took me a while to find them, but I found them, ordered them. And as I started to read, it was sort of the same thing as when I was reading Sri Aurobindo, that it didn't make a lot of sense, but I knew there was something there, right? And I knew it was more than what the Western translators were saying about, barbarism and, eulogizing rivers and trees. There was something more, but I wasn't sure what. And so again, they were parked up on my bookshelf and occasionally brought down. So from there, graduated from Harvard. I don't know how much time or detail that you like, but graduated from Harvard, started in with Fidelity, 10 to 12 years, still not on a specific spiritual path, but dabbling in integral yoga and Sri Aurobindo and others reading, if you will. And then I had another turning point. One morning, I had this little ritual where I would get up in the morning and I would study Sanskrit, for maybe half hour, 45 minutes before going into work. And then I would meditate. And then I would, 10 to 12 years, still not on a specific spiritual path, but dabbling in integral yoga and Sri Aurobindo and others reading, if you will. And then I had another turning point. One morning, I had this little ritual where I would get up in the morning and I would study Sanskrit, for maybe half hour, 45 minutes before going into work. And then I would And then I would read something of Sri Aurobindo's. That was sort of my hour and a half. And one morning, when I was meditating, I had this vision of Sri Aurobindo sitting in a chair. And oddly enough, there was a dog sitting by his side. So I'm not sure what all that meant, but when I came out of the meditation and went to read something of his, it was some of his writings on astrology. And I thought, really? Sri Aurobindo believed in astrology? This was something I had never had an interest, never believed in, never had a reading or desire. But with that, it just something clicked. And I thought, I need to find out what this is all about. And it just so happened that a week later I was traveling to Santa Fe with my sister, and I looked up and I found a Vedic astrologer, and we both got readings. And during her reading, she was first. She said, "Could you tell me one of my gifts?" Right? Well, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to ask the same. So I said, "Could you tell me one of my gifts?" And this was a Vedic astrologer from India. He actually headed up the Vedic Astrology Association of America. So he was a very wise astrologer. And he looked at my chart, and he looked at me, and he paused. He looked back down, looked at me again, and he said, "Astrology." He said, "To be a Jyotishi."
Wow.
I said, "What?" But something happened in that moment. I don't know, Shakti, something passed. And I became obsessed. I became totally night and day, over a day, even while I was working. So probably 15 years while I was working. And then for a whole decade, dived into travels to India, Vedic astrology, Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, went back to school for Ayurveda, read not all, but most of the ancient Indian scriptures. I just had I don't know how to put it. Just totally, except to say I was also going through my Rahu, 18 years. So perhaps it had something to do with. But it all just rushed in. And after 3 or 4 years, I realized I couldn't do both and stay healthy and sane, because I also had a very heavy workload. So I took a sabbatical from work, and surprisingly, never really to go back into financial services, and just started diving deeply into Vedic astrology. And like I said, integral yoga from what I could, again, read and understand, because it was kind of a lonely path. There was no one that I knew that followed this. But that was, and for the next kind of decade, my focus. And I got very into, well, we'll talk about astrology in a little bit, so I'll kind of leave that to the side. But ultimately, what ended up happening is that my Jyotishi teacher put me into connection with Vladimir, who had been translating Jyotish scripture for her. And she said, "By the way, he's also, Sri Aurobindo and the Mother follower." And so we connected. He was in India. We connected online. And it led to a discussion about HP Rama being 2 hours away. I had moved to Charlotte by that time, 2 hours away, and wanting to build a Sri Aurobindo center. And so there was kind of that introduction that was made through Vladimir. And within a few months, I was actively engaged at the LaGrasse and in the process of relocation. But a very interesting thing to me, where the Mother now comes in, I see Sri Aurobindo as kind of introducing me into this whole field that was so different than my business mind. As I look back, I see it less maybe about Jyotish and more about developing another side of my capacities that would come in to be useful and complement my business background as I got into kind of the environment here at LaGrasse. But interestingly, when H.P. Rama invited me to come in as executive director, he said, "Well, it's going to be a full-time job and you won't be able to do Jyotish." It's been my love and passion, surely. We really just need you full time. And so it was, I don't know, Makrant, it was so odd, because where is there ever the opportunity to do something and serve at a place like LaGrasse? But there was this, I think it may be just a fear or hesitancy. So one night, I said, "Okay, I got to figure this out." One night, I just asked the Mother before I went to bed, I said, please help me understand what I'm supposed to do at this point. You know, I love astrology. You know, I've been dedicated, but you also know, that HP Rama has come to me for this, and let me know what to do because I can't envision giving up my passion of Jyotish. And strangely enough, the next morning I woke up, I had very little interest in pursuing Jyotish. It's not that I didn't still love it, but I knew right away what I was supposed to do, and that passion and that desire and that attachment suddenly disappeared. And so she opened up kind of the path for me to come here and to deepen really kind of my understanding and following of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. So don't know if that's a little bit of a long, and I know we're getting close to the 15, but those were a couple turning points in my life.
Thank you, Radhe. That's such an extraordinary story, so moving, very, very inspiring. And I guess I'm so glad you brought in, HP Rama, the whole family. We know them. They are utterly dedicated, to this cause. And I know that the center that's coming up is going to be, I think, one of the best in the world. And having you and Vladimir right there on site, as it were, and making it happen as it sort of manifests is, I think, a great gift, not just, for the area, where we all live, the South, but for all of North America, in fact. And I think that we've talked about this, but in terms of the, bigger awakening that we are all hoping for, I think it will have a very important role to play. So let's pick this up in our next episode. It's really established a wonderful launching pad for our discussion to follow. So thank you, viewers, for joining us, and do continue to support us in this journey to rediscover the living wisdom of the Veda, because the only Veda, what actually knowing is the living Veda, which persists to this day. It's a continuous stream of wisdom, and that's what the Shruti means. And Sri Aurobindo has given us the royal road, as it were, to the Veda. With these words, thank you, Radhe, and see you soon. Namaste.